My name is Rich,
My name is Ben.
and on this very special episode of Reef Beef, we've got Dr. Christopher Jury here to talk to us about alkalinity demand, the realities and ins and outs. We kind of are going to do a deep dive into it. We're going to talk a little bit about phosphate and a little bit about what's going on with the coral reefs and the planet. According to Christopher's research, it's not what you think. This episode is sponsored by saltwateraquarium.com, Champion Lighting and Supply, and powered by PolypLab. This is what, Ben?
This is Reef Beef.
Damn straight! My name is Richard.
My name is Benjamin.
And today, on a very special episode of Reef Beef, we are joined by the fabulous Chris Jury. And if you don't know who Dr. Christopher Jury is, you will in a few minutes. This show is sponsored by saltwateraquarium.com.
Powered by PolypLab.
And sponsored by Champion Lighting and Supply, as well as being sponsored and supported by all of the fabulous Reef Beefers. This is Reef Beef. Ben, we're going to bring Chris on in a minute, although he's lurking right now.
He's lurking in the shadows.
lurking.
Richard, be careful. There's a giant copper band butterfly behind you.
I know. And my background today is the blue spot jawfish that I freaking love. That as soon as the day after I took this video, he vanished.
Yeah, he vanished back to the Gulf of America.
He disappears. The Gulf of America. He disappears and is like, sometimes he's gone for a week and goes somewhere else in the tank and then shows up. And
it's holiday.
And it makes me so nervous because I think he's gone somewhere and died.
He can have a holiday.
So he makes me nervous. He's one of my favorite fish. I also got I guess we're talking about stuff now. I got a stripey.
Oh, cool.
Australian stripey, a tiny stripey that my Rainfordia was stalking for about 24 hours.
It's like, I saw the video and it's like he comes up and he's doing some mental arithmetic. It's like, does that fit? Nah, I might leave him alone.
Yeah, maybe we'll put the video in. He comes up and I didn't get it on video because I was just watching it. And the Rainfordia, you almost never see, right? The Opercularis, the flathead perch.
Yeah.
And he comes out
because they cost a shitload.
And I mean in the tank,
Oh, okay.
And they're not.
He hides a lot, and he's expensive.
They're not as expensive, and they're captive bred, so they're a good fish. And he was totally out in the open, and he kept getting closer and closer to this stripey. The stripey, by the way, was not an inexpensive fish either.
No.
And he would get almost to where he would touch him, and then his mental calculus would go, no, oh, maybe,
boop.
No.
I have a client that has like a hand-sized one in his tank. I guess they can be dicey, right?
I got him because I'm tired of Mahanos. And in the lab back here, I put a couple of tilefish in some other tanks because I noticed in not tilefish, filefish.
Filefish.
In the tank with the baby corals, not the youngster corals, the toddlers. I guess they're kindergarten now, actually.
Yeah, they're growing
there's
up.
no Mahano, and there's Mahano everywhere else. So I put one of those filefish in another tank, and I got another one, and then I got a Klein's butterfly in another tank to give it a try and see what was going on.
I even see a Mahano in the video behind you.
Yes, that one is gone now. I went through with Aphaptasia and a long needle to distribute it.
Yeah.
And killed off a bunch of them because I'm so tired of them. And they repopulate so quickly.
Yeah.
But then I thought, let's try a stripey. I was at Aquatic Collection. Aquatic Collection, our friends Carson and Joe.
Love the place.
And they've got stripeys in every flat. In every coral tank, they've got them. Even the softy coral tanks, even the LPS. Now, granted, the LPS don't live there forever, but that convinced me to give it a try. And if he's a problem, I'm sure he's going to be very easy to catch.
Yeah, but I mean, you of course you have some LPS, but you have mostly SPS dominate. I'm not too sure if they mess with SPS much.
Yeah, but I do have some LPS, and I've got some really awesome LPS and some NPS. So we'll see. We'll see what happens.
And as we all know, the tricky thing, the part that I hate is like, how do I want to say this? Like present behavior does not foretell future behavior.
They could switch on a dime.
Yep.
Yeah, we had a pair of Klein's butterflies in the big tank at the Steinhardt that were great model citizens, and then started nipping at SPS. And we were trying to,
people like, hey, would they eat LPS? And it's like, they don't until they do.
Yeah. It took me like a month and a half to 2 months of snorkeling with a trap, a crab trap. So I would pull up
you just show it to them.
I put it down where they were hanging out and put food in it and pull it up, and it would close the door and pull it up, and I would catch them, and they would not go in it for a month and a half.
Well, because your display of aggressive behavior, I'm sure, was
display. No, I was like 10, 15 feet above it.
Your vulgar display of power.
Well, yes, you will do what I'd say. There was one more thing I want to say about what's going on over here. I got some new tanks to replace the all those plastic tubs, those two tubs I did in the auxiliary lab. My laundry room has now got permanent tanks in it. But I used some big plastic tubs, 57-gallon plastic tubs that don't get filled all the way up, and I didn't really concentrate this year and get a spawn to raise, so there's nothing in them. And I got to thinking, and my wife said, wouldn't those be better if they were glass? Than most of the year they could be real tanks.
Your wife is of the correct mindset.
My wife, I was gonna say I don't know why she's with me, but I do.
Yeah.
I do.
It's that hair. That pops in and out of reality.
That's what it's still sticking up. I was at a juggling convention yesterday, so I took a shower. I don't know, so don't mean it. Anyway, I got some glass tanks, and I was ordering them from Aquatic Collection. He was going to get them for me, the sizes I want. I didn't really realize what tank he was ordering, and then he said he couldn't get them; they were out of stock. And he said go to Petco, and they were going to be like $130 each.
Yeah.
And I checked the dimensions, and I was like, oh shit, that's just a 40-gallon breeder. Yeah. I can't believe I'm getting 40-gallon breeders.
Oh, dude, I love 40-gallon breeders.
It's great. And I got them. I went to Petco, and the guy was like, that'll be, I put my old number in, and it still worked, because I don't like Petco, so I don't go there very often.
When you were a puppy kidnapper?
It's like two phone numbers ago.
Yeah.
And I got them for $63 each.
That's pretty good. I was about to say, there's PetSmarts there as well, right?
Yeah.
Because PetSmart, you might not have been able to wait for, but like occasionally they have like $1 a gallon sale thing.
Yeah. I just happened to get in there, and they were doing they got to get rid of their inventory for whatever reason.
It's crazy though. They're not to slight your tanks, but they do. They do. I don't know if they use Aquarium or who they use, but they are rather thin. They're not as robust as
these are the thick ones. I can actually tell you who they are because you'll be interested. Because I had to get a new diamond bit for it.
God, I don't even know if some of those companies exist anymore. Perfecto and Odell.
No, it's the same company Carson was going to get for me.
All Glass.
It is. No, it's Aquarium.
Aquarium, yeah.
Yeah, but the 40-gallon breeder, I was like, this is hefty.
Prepare yourself for mediocrity. That's just my opinion.
Oh, and I also was questioning what size hole to drill for it.
Oh yeah.
60 millimeter, which is.
Bro, this is the USA, man.
1 3/8. Or
why can't you just say it was like 2.5 Cheetos or something?
Or 65 millimeter, which
half
is
of a shoe,
1.5 inches. And because
half of a Texas food bowl, Richard.
Half, 1/90th of a Texas, 1/89th.
You and your choice of excellent measuring units.
Yes. Anyway, go with the bigger one.
Yeah, to have it wiggle room.
Yeah, the way the gasket is so wide.
Yeah.
I think that the smaller one would work, but it makes me a little nervous.
That's what I say about your mom.
It's really tight. Is that what you say about my mom?
The gasket is so wide.
Oh, not really tight? Okay. Yeah. We are such assholes. Say it about my dad.
Your dad. No,
that way it's not misogynist. It's just
You love
Totally
your
being a
dad so much.
jackass.
Your dad had a loose gasket. There, are you happy?
Yeah. Okay. And what's going on with you, Ben?
Man, so I had a client stop service, which is crazy. They were just tired.
You mean
I
you
could
were
go on and
fired?
on, but
You're
wealthy
fired.
people just got tired of it. It had nothing to do with me. But yeah, I spilled milk in his living room. No. Um, and so, and the deal was sometimes I don't do this, but he was like, but it was really nice equipment and tanks. There's 260-gallon aquariums built into the wall. So he's like, I'd like to take the tanks out, but I offer to you, you can have all the stuff if that's worth it to you. And I was like, okay, I'll do it. But damn, I mean, I knew they would be, but they're very tall tanks. They're like 3 foot tall tanks that are made by Planet Aquarium, and they were heavy as hell. And so,
Wow. Okay, wait. So this is the tank. These are the tanks that had the
yeah,
temperature problem
yes, which
that you
again,
worked through for so long and got it under control, and now they're like, nah.
I'm sort of used to this stuff since I do it for a living. There has been times where like extremely wealthy clients will just wake up one day and say, doesn't have anything to do with you. We're just going to travel a lot. We don't want the aquariums anymore. And it's just like, okay, just kick me in the left and the right testicle at the same time.
So
But
you got all the equipment and all the livestock?
oh yeah, already sold half the livestock. I'm putting it in people's tanks, and I mean, already I'm up. I mean, I would always take. There was a large account, money wise, so I would always rather keep the money. But this wasn't a bad way to recoup some money back out. And I will say, out of a stroke of luck, that same week I landed an account that pays about 80% of what they were paying.
Okay.
So it's a bit of I'd love to move forward, but it's a little bit of spinning the wheels. But
Yeah.
I got my neighbor who's an emergency medical technician that rides on ambulances to come help me. And I gave him a $50 gift certificate to something in the beginning. And then he kept elbowing me through the whole thing, saying like $50, man, this is just the start. Because they were god awful heavy. I would imagine each of the tanks, and there was two of them, probably like 500 pounds. But I have my
500
hydraulic.
pounds. What kind of units is that?
Oh no, I'm sorry. I'm
It's like
sorry.
100 Texas
Yeah, yeah,
food
yeah.
bowl.
I know. It's like about 63 bags of pinto beans. I'm going to use anything but metric system.
Okay.
But
You know what else happened here? My bog got a leak in it. I guess I'll take a video of that.
that it went too high.
No, the bottom started leaking.
Well, that's what you get for Aquarium.
Bog water.
Ooh.
No, it was like a windowsill planter box.
Well, that's what you get for using a windowsill planter box.
Well, it was supposed to be temporary, and
Yeah.
so I had to, like, an emergency-ish, build an acrylic tank that worked out really well. I should talk about that because I was not at all worried it was going to leak. We'll talk about that on another episode.
Talk about talking about it.
That's what we do. Oh, by the way, Ben was going to shave his chest on this show, because that's what he promised to do. But we decided, because we have our guest, that we're going to postpone that as not to take away from our guest. So next episode, Ben will shave his chest.
As if any of these prior antics are just going to be any better for Dr. Jury.
Yeah. Or if you really shave your chest.
I got a beef wall behind me.
Saltwateraquarium.com. Saltwateraquarium.com. They've got the salt. They've got the water. They've got all the aquariums and certainly some.com. Saltwateraquarium.com. That's where you get your stuff from.
Yeah, you get a lot of stuff there, and it gets to you quick, especially if you're in the continental United States, because they have 3 distribution centers. I ordered some more F-Aptasia. I'm back to F-Aptasia.
Shocker.
I like F-Aptasia. I like not having to mix it, and it works very well. And I ordered some at like 11. I swear, I say this every time, but I ordered it before 11, and it had shipped the same day by 1, and was here in a day or 2. So
Saltwater.com, new psychic department. They're sending you your package before you even ordered it.
yes, they are. So check them out. They've been a fan of the show for a long time. And their website is
saltwateraquarium.com.
Yeah. So check them out.
Saltwateraquarium.com. Now it's your turn, Richard.
Right on. Thanks a lot, saltwateraquarium.com.
I got a beef wall behind me.
Let's move on to our guest. We have with us today postdoctoral researcher at the Hawaii Institute of Marine Biology, University of Hawaii at Manoa. I think that's how you pronounce that. And he's been in the hobby for at least 24 years. Christopher Jury, Dr. Christopher Jury, welcome to the show, and thank you for being here, Doctor.
Awesome.
Yeah, no, thank you guys for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Now, if you don't know who Chris is Chris okay? I used to call you Chris.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I go by Chris.
Chris used to be very active in the hobby and wrote a bunch of articles, I think on reefs.com. They're still up there. Chris co-authored the Skeptical Reefing on phosphate with me, which was great because he pointed out some really interesting things that made the case even better. And is there anything, I know that you were going to take a look at that again and see what we actually said.
Yeah.
Did you have a chance? Not to put you on the spot.
No, I read through it again because, I look back and it's like, oh God, that was almost 10 years ago that we wrote that. Let me look and see what the hell we actually wrote. So I read through it. It's like, oh yeah, okay. I remember now. But yeah, no, it seems like it was a good contribution to the hobby. And, really, I think we're able to show in a lot of cases situations that really blew up what we thought and expected about how phosphate should be working in reef tanks, but also how it's happening out on natural reefs. And a lot of those systems, really put a wrinkle in what we think or what we thought is going on, or what is a rule rather than merely a guideline or a tendency.
I want to ask you if you've been keeping up on what's going with phosphate in the hobby, what's going on now, but I'm going to jump the gun a little bit and we can either talk about this now or later. But, the bolus method is a thing that I know you now know about. And my biggest complaint about it right now is that there's no support for some of the stuff they're saying. And thinking about just talking about our phosphate article, the thing that we labored over was making sure we had a case to present, a case that was supported, that we could present to the hobby and go, this is why, and this is how it works. And please check our math. And if we're wrong, tell us we're wrong. And we're not, and now what we're getting, even more now that articles have seemed to have gone the wayside of the dodo bird, is just people making claims and then those claims spreading. So it strikes me as, when I keep saying what I want from anybody who's got a new idea, it's like, show me some work, show me something that you've done some work on figuring it out so we can all know what the hell you're actually saying.
Yeah, so and I've only been familiar with bolus method literally for a few days. You mentioned it the other day, and that's the first I had heard of it. So, looked up information regarding it, and I would be maybe slightly less kind than you were in my assessment of it. I think they have one good idea, or at least one good idea that I'll mention here, but the case is built on a lot of unsupported claims, but more egregiously to me, it is based off of a lot of chemically impossible claims. Like, that is not how the chemistry works. And if that's your whole method, I'm not sure it's the best way to go.
Yeah, that's the extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And they say that they're writing a book and going to have a book on it, but it's like, wow, don't write a book on it and make us buy a book. That makes me do what Chris's face is doing, which is, I just touched something icky.
Hey, let me throw a little, let's drag some context into this.
Okay.
Chris, what is your PhD in?
So, PhD is in biological oceanography. Yeah, I know, I'm very fancy.
Shit.
I know some things, but a lot of my work, starting in my master's, a long while ago, a lot of it has focused on ocean acidification. So
Okay.
I'm extremely familiar with carbonate chemistry. I
Awesome.
use this stuff all day, every day. But
And what are you doing postdoc at the University of Hawaii?
yeah, so a few different projects, and maybe we'll talk a little bit more about this later, but a lot of the work that we've been doing recently, that I've been doing and other folks in our kind of working group have been doing, have been addressing, especially some of my work, looking at the potential for corals to adapt to ocean warming and ocean acidification, but also responses of entire reef communities to these future ocean stressors. So seeing not just what makes the corals tick, but kind of what makes the whole system tick. What's happening to the sponges, what's happening to the algae, what's happening to community calcification, community photosynthesis, and microbes and this and that and all sorts of things. Yeah.
Man, I don't know if anyone's ever said this to you, and I don't mean this to sound corny or anything, but I appreciate you working on that.
Thank you very much. Yeah, no, and we've gotten some really cool results over the last few years, and in particular, some things a project that we're getting a bunch of papers out of, wrapped up a couple of years ago, but it was a 2-year-long experiment. So
Yeah.
Wow.
I work out on Coconut Island, which is where the Hawaii Institute of Marine Biology is. And the experiment was, nominally, it was 2 years. It was actually a little bit longer, plus getting everything set up and whatnot. I was at Coconut to maintain our essentially 40 reef tanks that we were running continuously every day for almost 3 years, every
Wow.
single day. So it was a big commitment. But we've gotten some really, really cool stuff out of it. We're still getting papers out of that because it just takes time to analyze all the data and get everything written up and published.
Yeah. And
Awesome.
for those,
I just wanted to provide context for
no, there's great context. I even wrote down fucking Ben, great. For those of you who don't know, Coconut Island is actually Gilligan's Island. And this is for old people who know what Gilligan's Island is. And Mary Ann Ginger or Mrs. Howell. Okay, no, we're not doing that.
Velma.
Oh yeah. But Fred had that ascot.
Yeah,
That was
I like a
pretty
nice
attractive.
ascot.
I do too.
I got a beef wall behind me.
Powered by PolypLab. Powered by PolypLab. If you're not powered by PolypLab, there will be some problems in your lab.
And
You got to be powered by PolypLab. That's
got to be powered by
basically.
Polyp. I like the reef roids. That's
Yeah.
a food that is always in my auto feeders for feeding my corals. Always.
Guess
in my
what?
What?
I
Ben?
just received something by PolypLab. I'm sorry, I don't know what they call it, but the tray that the Genesis blocks can fit in.
Oh God. Okay. Make sure you have it next time so we can look at it.
Yes. That would be
Fantastic.
important.
Do you like it?
Yeah, it looks cool. It leaves space. What I was worried about is like on the ends, would it close it up or whatever? And I don't know how effective this is, but it's like they have some tops that like if you close it, it's anaerobic. If you take it off, it's aerobic. I'm not
That's
sure
interesting.
how
We'll have to do some testing on that. I like the idea though.
Yeah.
So yeah. And we like their gluelets. And I just the other day was doing some photography and used their iPhone, the thing that goes on the phone with the colored gel that helps you filter the light to something resembling reality in a digital world.
So let me ask you something. When you're trying to power your lab, what are you powering it with?
With PolypLab, Ben.
Absolutely.
I got a beef wall behind me.
Chris, I want to talk about your work, but a little later, because the main reason I wanted you to come on was to talk about alkalinity and calcification and uses in tanks. And, I guess really, Sanjay had asked this question a while ago, but it was really like, when I remember the gist of it was, and I see this in my tank as well, the surprising amount of effort it takes to bring alkalinity back up after it drops, and how that probably shouldn't be surprising, but it seems very surprising. So if my tank, which happens, it drops from 8, 9 into the 6s or 7s for whatever reason, it really takes effort to bring it back up. I was trying to bring it up with more caulk, or bring it up with increased flow through the calcium reactor, and just practically, I've concluded, no, I'm using bicarbonate, sodium bicarbonate, to bring it up, because otherwise it takes so long to get it back up. And so we were talking about, why is that, and how do you measure, and what does it mean, and how do you figure out how much your tank is consuming, and does it matter, and all kinds of questions like that. But I'll let you take whatever aspect of that whole discussion, units and everything, whatever you feel like starting with, unless you want me to aim it more, because that was kind of a terrible introduction.
So this meandering story, you go with it right now.
Yeah. I don't know what I said. I'm punting now.
No,
Don't fumble. Don't fumble.
No, so I'll say a really critical thing to understand there from the start is, and I agree with you, when your alkalinity gets quite depleted, or same with calcium or something like that, when it gets quite depleted, it really takes a lot of effort to bring it back up. The problem is not that it has gotten low. The problem is just that to get it back up there takes a large quantity of whatever you're adding. Going from an alkalinity of 6 to 7 takes exactly the same amount of dosing as to go from 10 to 11, so
Right.
that's that aspect of it. So yeah, in particular, from what I recall of conversation with Sanjay that we're having, God, last year sometime, I forget exactly, but he was seeing what seemed to be just outrageous alkalinity consumption in his tank, was really struggling to keep it up, and was thinking like, this cannot be right. This doesn't make sense. And did some calculations, ran the numbers for him, and the conclusion was, yeah, that makes sense. Your reef tank is operating like a healthy reef in nature would. So
sometimes I remember being able to bring the alkalinity back up easily. Just bump the calcium reactor by either drop the pH or run the feed pump more, but then other times it doesn't. And so I guess it depends on how deliciously your corals are feeling at the moment, right?
Right. No, that's, yeah, certainly depending on how fast they're calcifying, that's gonna affect, fundamentally, how much do you need to add? Because you need to add however much they're using, on a daily basis or continuously or whatever. But what I'll say is, yeah, using something like sodium bicarbonate, if you need a big boost, because it's already not too far off of the bicarbonate-carbonate equilibrium in seawater, it's not going to have a huge effect on pH, so you can add a lot at a time. If you use kalkwasser, you're adding a lot of alkalinity, you're adding no carbon with that, your pH is going to go super high, if you add a lot, that is. And you just simply can't add as much at a time or semi-continuously in order to achieve what you want. So it's just a kind of the practicality of how fast can you add that additive without causing other problems.
My pH hit 8.8 when I did this, and this was only from an addition of 250 milliliters of kalkwasser into 450 gallons total in the system. Although granted, the display tank gets most of the turnover, and that's a 150 gallon box, but there's probably 100 gallons of water in there. So, but when it spikes like that, I add I had 10% muriatic acid because 8.8 makes me nervous. Although they don't seem to care. They also don't seem to care about the drop in alkalinity. So I guess a question there is, does that drop in alkalinity, can it slow down their calcification, or are they just using it up and you don't have enough extra to get it up to the number that we're chasing? Or
Right. So, I mean, definitely their calcification rate, corals, coralline algae, other calcifiers, although those are going to be the main ones in any reef tank or on a reef. Certainly their calcification rate depends on the alkalinity of the water. More, they're using bicarbonate and CO2, converting it internally into carbonate to build their skeletons. So they're reducing the alkalinity as they do that. Calcium carbonate precipitation or magnesium carbonate or any carbonate reduces the alkalinity. That's just chemically what's going on there. When it's more available, pretty much all of them tend to calcify faster, but how much of an effect that has is going to be variable organism to organism. So say, for example, the difference between an alkalinity of like 6 DKH and 7 DKH, you're probably not going to see a huge effect. There might be some, but it's probably going to be smaller than you're going to notice, whereas 6 versus 12 is probably going to have a really noticeable effect.
okay.
You know, it's
And
just,
also, it also occurs to me that at the same time, the same amount of alkalinity is going into the system. You know, the overall number has dropped, but it's not like there's not more alkalinity going. There's just not enough to bump my number back up.
Exactly.
So they're
Yeah,
eating,
yeah.
they're eating. I hesitate to use that word, but I still love the phrase cooking rock,
They're-
and I'm so sad we can't use it anymore. But
Yeah.
you know, they're using. So
Mhm.
it can't be the worst thing. So I guess I'm saying don't panic, bring it up.
Mhm.
But now I'm saying, you know, the amount of sodium bicarbonate I had to add was really not so much. And you can
Right.
add that and get it away from the scary number
Mhm.
pretty quickly, but not add too much to crash it. So
Absolutely. Yeah, no, and I mean, fundamentally, if your alkalinity is dropping day after day after day, you're not adding enough. They're using it faster than what you're adding. If it's going up day after day, you're adding too much. You know, you're adding more than what they're consuming. I'll say with all of this, there's really no trick to that except measure and adjust, measure and adjust. That's the only thing you can actually do.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know when it drops in my system, it's either because there's not enough my media in my calcium reactor has been dissolved to a point where it's ineffective, or that I haven't added calc to the calc machine in enough time. And I used to panic on that, but after having done this about 8 times now, I just go, oh, okay, just boost it back up again and add the things that needed to add.
I got a beef wall behind me.
Champion champion lighting and supply. Champion lighting and supply. That's what I need to work on that one. But that's what it is. It's champion lighting and supply.
Champion Lighting and Supply. We love Champion Lighting and Supply because they champion supplies and lighting.
Yes.
And Todd, who is one of the people who runs the place, has really got his finger on the pulse of what actual hobbyists need and do. He's always learning, always paying attention, always bringing new products to market. He's got the sweeps that are in that are pretty cool that I misplaced one part of, which is why I haven't shown it yet. As soon as I find it, I'm going to set it up on something and we'll use it. But one of the things, this is what tells you that Champion Lighting and Supply and Todd are really, really committed and on top of everything. They don't pack their stuff with packing peanuts or plastic bags or bubble wrap, because as reefers, we should care about the planet. It seems like we should. So they reuse cardboard boxes. Todd bought a machine that grinds them up or crushes them up, slices them, and they make perfect packing material. And they don't really, and it's totally recyclable. And I think that is the bomb, as we used to say 100 years ago.
I think it's the bee's knees.
I think it's the business.
Yeah, the business.
The business.
Anyways, champion, if you're trying to champion your lighting and supply, then there's only one place to go.
Sing it, Ben.
Champion lighting and supply. Champion lighting and supply.
I got a beef wall behind me.
Ben, what were you going to say?
I was going to ask Chris, do you have an opinion on whether using milliequivalents, what is it, milliequivalents per liter or DKH? Because our friend Dr. Craig Bingman, he's always laughing because he said everyone uses DKH, but it's just some unnecessary arithmetic from milliequivalents.
It is, but it's it's kind of like Celsius versus Fahrenheit. You're measuring the same thing, just using a different scale, and the rest of the world is using Celsius, but this is America.
Yeah.
We're going to use Fahrenheit.
Yep. In the Gulf of America.
Why are there two different scales? How did that even happen?
Oh,
do you know?
Yeah. So generally, what we're actually going to use in real chemistry and oceanography, things like that, we'd use something similar to milliequivalents per liter. What we actually do in oceanography is we're doing microequivalents, so the same thing times 1,000 per kilogram of seawater. So anyway, it's very similar. It's just accounting for because we can measure weight more accurately than we can measure volume, so we do it by weight. Okay. That's all. That's the complication, or that's the only complication there. DKH, God, I forget the exact details, but like developed like way back in the day in Germany, and for whatever reason that just kind of caught on in aquarium keeping. So it's the unit that probably most people use, most people are familiar with.
Yeah. Well, the scale is easier, right? It feels easier. You're not saying 2.5.
Yeah, that's
you're saying 9. Yeah.
Celsius versus Fahrenheit, whatever's easier for you.
I've largely given up on the fight, and the same Craig Bingman, Dr. Bingman, Biggerman gets the nitrate measurements is crazier. Is it NO3N or NO3 minus? And I just decided to use whatever the hobby uses, so I can have the same white stick that everybody else has.
Yeah,
so
there's also that plural, the nitrates.
Yeah, and phosphates.
People say, "What are your nitrates?" It's like, well, my nitrate is. What are your ammonias?
Yeah, I have one Anthea.
Yeah.
I was going to say, ask the fishes. I don't know.
Ask the fishes. Back to what you were dealing with Sanjay. You measured, and you're doing it by square meters of coral, right? Something like that.
Right.
Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, no. So let me, I guess, kind of, I'll approach this from the side of how do we typically measure these things in science? If we're interested in what coral reefs are actually doing out in the real world, what are we measuring, and how does that kind of, how does their actual function out there translate into something that we can understand and use in an aquarium?
God, I love you.
Well, this is, I guess I'll say, this is one of the great things about, being a hobbyist, having a background in that, but also being a scientist, having a background in that. I can talk to both worlds, and I can, there's so much to gain from both sides of that. So anyway, that's just an aside there. So, in science, we're going to use metric, right? So, typically, just for an idea, for a typical real healthy reef, a lot of coral cover, 30%, 60%, a real nice reef, not crazy insane coral cover, but a good healthy reef might be calcifying at a rate of about 10 kilograms per square meter per year.
Okay, I want to back up one sec. 30% coral cover. What does that mean, and how does that relate to our tanks?
Yeah, so if you were to just run a line across your tank, how many of the points under that line are intersecting sand? How many are intersecting live rock? How many are intersecting coral? What percentage of the total surface area of your system is actually covered by live coral? or sponges or algae or, whatever you're interested in.
From a top view.
Top down.
Okay.
Although folks are increasingly starting to use photogrammetry to build 3D models, because as it turns out, biology happens in 3 dimensions, not 2.
Yeah.
But that's still, folks are using it, but it's not as widespread. And just historically, what can you do when you're out on a reef? You can take photos from the top down.
Yeah. Because
So
I
it's
know
a practical.
on my display, the top half is wall to wall coral. It's you almost see nothing now below it, but the bottom half is all open in caves and NPS. But I guess we'd be measuring from the top to get the square meter per 10 kilograms.
Right. So, I mean, historically, that's how we do it.
Okay.
But because these newer methods have become available, obviously, you're missing an important part of the story when you do everything in 2 dimensions, just top down. You're missing all that space where there's important biology happening in, all the sides and underhangs and that sort of thing.
But for now, if I wanted to compare my tank to the numbers you're going to be talking about right now, I'd be taking a picture from the top of the tank with a line through it, measuring and figuring out what percentage of that is coral versus not coral from the top.
And basically your tank gains weight over time.
Yes. I mean, hopefully.
Yeah.
No diet.
Otherwise, it's
not growing. Yeah.
It's not growing. Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
so
go ahead.
I'll say that's just for a ballpark. It's going to vary a little bit system to system, but a good healthy reef that hasn't recently had a major disturbance like a hurricane came in and turned everything into a parking lot. It's going to be somewhere in that range. Certainly, though, you can have reefs or areas of reefs where you have extremely high coral cover of fast growing corals, a lot of acropora, like, a big field of tabletop acropora that are covering 80% of the reef, something like that. On those reefs, you can get even higher numbers. Instead of 10 kilograms per square meter per year, you can get up to 12, maybe even 15, but that's like very close to total coverage of fast growing corals. On the other hand, a lot of reefs, a lot of reef flats, for example, don't have that much coral, or they've been damaged by runoff or coastal pollution or something like that. And those reefs are going to be down, maybe instead of 10, maybe 5 kilograms per square meter per year, or 1 kilogram per square meter per year.
Okay. All right. I want to know if we can convert that into something hobbyists can use. But I also want to say it points us in the direction. First of all, I like ballparks is all we're ever going to have until computers and testing gets way better and way more automatic. But it points to why a newer tank will process less alkalinity than an older, more mature tank that's chugging along for a while. You could think of a new tank having been as essentially having been disturbed by runoff or eutrophication. I like a second syllable in that word, eutrophication.
Eutrophication.
So the idea that people have that all tanks are kind of the same is true and also completely wrong. You gotta, your indicators of health are how is stuff growing at any rate consistently over time. And if it's stalled out, there's something going on. Right. Okay. But more importantly, unless you want to react to that.
No. So I'll say, maybe an analogy would be, let's say you've got a dog. How much do you feed the dog? Well, it matters a lot if it's a Chihuahua or a Saint Bernard. Alkalinity consumption in your tank is going to be very much the same. So, okay. So,
and also, is the dog new to your house? Is the dog a rescue? It's going to take the dog a few months to really start grubbing down and feeling comfortable. you know, and
Absolutely.
not having his metabolism keyed up. So, okay.
Absolutely.
You went into analogies, and I love metaphor and analogies. So 10 kilogram per liter per year.
Let's just call that, it's not the maximum. It's certainly way higher than the minimum. This is a really nice reef that is chugging along, calcifying a lot. So how does that translate into a change in chemistry, which is what we actually measure in our home aquariums? And honestly, that's oftentimes what we're measuring out in nature, along with a bunch of other parameters to make these estimates. So in order to kind of make sense of this, I'll just use an example tank. So hopefully folks can kind of wrap their head around it. So let's say we got a 50-gallon breeder. It's about a meter long. It's 36 inches long. It's about half a meter wide. So it's about half a square meter.
Okay.
So
40-gallon breeder.
A 40, well, for the math
do you mean
I think they get a specific thing for their measurements.
Yeah, no.
So the tank size doesn't matter except for the water volume, which is what I ran the math in. So just let me go with it.
You got it. I don't know if there's actually a 50-gallon breeder tank. There might be. So I didn't want people to get caught up on that.
Right.
So,
no, I used to have one. They used to manufacture them. 40-gallon breeders, same thing, just a few inches shorter.
Gotcha. Thank you for my pedantry.
Things can breed in whatever gallon they want to, Richard.
So, okay, let's just say we've got a tank about that size. You put sand in it, you put live rock, corals, things like that. You're not going to have 50 gallons of water. You're going to have, let's say, 40 gallons of water, something like that. And that's if it doesn't have a sump or anything, just for simplicity. So it's okay if you guys don't want to guess, but if you want to take a wild guess, what would your daily alkalinity consumption be in that tank with that water volume? And as long as you scale the size and the volume appropriately, it's not going to matter. But if it were growing at 10 kilograms per square meter per year, how much is the alkalinity going to change from one day to the next?
In DKH or mill equivalents?
DKH.
Let's do DKH.
Wait, I don't want to hear Richard's. Richard, you go.
You go first, Ben. I want to hear yours.
Okay.
You don't have to guess, but you can.
I'm going to say 3 DKH.
A day?
A day.
A day? I'm going to say
$1.
I'm going to say 1.
You overbid.
5.
5.
Hey, I was close.
5 DKH a day.
With that water volume. So let's say, in that situation, you've got no sump, you don't have additional water volume. Let's say you put a giant sump on the system and you double the water volume. So now you've got 80 gallons of water instead of 40 gallons of water. What's the change in alkalinity going to be in that new water volume?
I mean, it's dilution, right? But it would still be doing the same amount of draw. No?
But you've got double the water. So it's either the same or it's about half.
So the quantity of alkalinity it's taking up is the same. The reef is doing the same thing. The change in the water chemistry is going to be half as much because you doubled the water volume.
So the reservoir of alkalinity is bigger.
Is twice as big. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So is that a way to say, sort of like Richard's system where he has all these sumps tied together, there's a lot of empty water volume, is a great way to sort of like pace that out?
The bigger your water volume relative to, what's causing changes in the water chemistry, which is going to be, your nice display reef, the bigger the water volume, the more buffer you have against changes in chemistry, because you're drawing the same amount of stuff out of a lot more water. So the change in the concentration is going to be a lot smaller. So
that was the whole point of the giant sump. Not necessarily for alkalinity, but for everything. The bigger the water volume, the more stable the system is, or the more slop time I have to fix a problem before it becomes catastrophic.
Which is not which is not a larger display for the display's sake. It's a larger sump, a larger reservoir for the dilution.
Right. If you have
Yeah,
a larger
exactly.
display, you've got more coral. And so your reservoir is effectively smaller than if you had just a bigger sump.
See, and I love this because I'm a fan of as big a sump as you can get, and this is a testament to, you know, large volumes of water as what you can get.
And so what's the practical takeaway for that for the average hobbyist?
So I would say one, alkalinity can get sucked up really damn fast in reef tanks. Realistically, you could be looking at if it were calcifying, if your system were calcifying as fast as a really nice healthy reef in nature, you could be seeing 4 or 5 DKH reduction in alkalinity per day. If you have a giant sump that doubles your water volume, it's going to be half that. If you triple your water volume, it's going to be 1/3 that. You get the idea.
And the way to check that is don't add any alkalinity and see how fast it goes down.
Exactly. Yeah. Measure it at 8 a.m. The next day, measure it at 8 a.m.
And then panic.
No change. And then panic. Yeah, exactly.
And then have your sodium bicarb
acid.
Right.
Yeah. Have everything ready to boost it back up.
Yep. No, I'll say, I know very few people that are getting those kinds of daily changes in their alkalinity, that kind of daily consumption. And the reality is that most of us do not have tanks that are calcifying as fast as those really ripping reefs in nature. Doesn't mean there's anything wrong with your tank. If you've got a lot of soft corals or a lot of slow growing corals or something, of course it's not going to calcify as fast as one of those.
It's hard to approximate nature.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, it also in nature, you're looking at different pieces of the reef, and you're saying that's what this piece is, and that's what this piece is, and that's what you have to do with your tanks. For me, I got to go through if I get around to it and do the. I'm pointing back here like you can see what I've got going on, but I'm about to lose some huge pieces of Monty Cap, and that's going to change my alkalinity usage because I'm just pulling them out.
Yeah, I mean, additions or subtractions of calcifying creatures in a home reef, you better keep an eye on the alkalinity because it's just logical that it's going to change with that.
Now, someone's going to want to know, how do you boost the calcification? Because everybody wants it to be growing. And if you boost it by whatever, what's the practical upshot in growth? Is it, I like to do that as a percentage, like with the phosphate thing, the one paper that we talked about, that's still the one that's being used. When I remember doing the math about how the skeleton density loss was like 8%.
Is the juice worth the squeeze?
And it was like, who cares about 8%? But I don't know if we can do that here, but that's the question. What people are going to, because they think calcification equals health, but it really just equals growth, which isn't necessarily health. Or is it?
Yeah. So I wouldn't say unhealthy corals don't calcify much, but faster calcification doesn't always inherently mean that it's necessarily healthier than in another situation, if that makes some sense.
Yeah, it just means that it's growing.
That it's growing faster. No, obviously, I think all of us want our corals to grow as quickly as we can get them to grow, can reasonably get them to grow. So
I mean, I feel that's the thing of the farmers, right? So like if you're growing corals to sell, you want to sort of like peg redline that growth. But I've always felt, as a hobbyist, that sure, I want corals to grow because a growing coral is a healthy coral, but I'm not so obsessed with it that I'm trying to redline that stuff.
So, well, I'll say I think sometimes, as we discuss in our phosphate article, sometimes folks get overly obsessed with chasing numbers.
Mm-hmm.
Just, I mean, so oftentimes taking something that can be very, very straightforward, relatively easy, relatively inexpensive, and making it just incredibly complex, a lot of maintenance, and oftentimes more expensive. Yeah, so I don't know, but being just crazy anal about tweaking every little parameter all the time to make everything perfect and optimal for what you think is optimal, usually it ends up resulting in something goes wrong eventually. You screw up and add too much, or your dosing pump screws up and adds too much of a chemical, or I don't know, just something tends to be off.
I mean,
Now,
this is what I've always thought about the people doing ICP and then adding bottles of trace elements. That's just an arena of this hobby I've never wanted to get into and didn't see how it was anything
yeah,
good.
yeah, no,
I-
I very much agree with
I
that.
saw somebody I saw somebody defending that the other day, saying, well, if it wasn't working, the companies wouldn't be making all those bottles. And it's like, no,
No.
they want to sell you the bottles. They're in. Okay.
Yeah. No, it's working exactly as designed. People are buying it. That's what it's designed for.
Yep.
Exactly.
I got a beef wall behind me.
All right, beefers, if you've listened this long, you might as well become part of our Discord community.
Might as well get a tattoo.
By the way, the Discord, I haven't been posting much this week, but I've been reading a lot. And man, the
It's
people
a
who are
thing.
there, they know stuff.
Yep.
Wow. I almost feel like I should not even post. There are people who've got such great tanks and such great knowledge, and they're so helpful both on the member side and the public side. It's incredible.
Here's what I can't believe unless I haven't been seeing it, but they'd talk about it if they would, but like everyone's chill. There's not some like drama factory.
Yeah, no, it's great. And like it got off topic in one of the channels. It was, it was getting all political or religious or something like that. And I just, Snowman started this, but I just put up the stay on target GIF.
Oh, I saw that.
Yeah. And people are like, oh, sorry. And it's like, no. Just do this in the channel that we have for that.
Yeah.
But even that discussion, it was contentious, but totally chill discussion. And it's great. And everyone, and you're right. When somebody has a different opinion, no one's ever like, screw you, you're doing it stupid. We have an outlet for that. We have the instead of Facebook or social media channel where you can take a screenshot of what you were going to post to, but not respond to it and then get it off your chest. It's pretty great. When I need information too, it's like, hey, what is everyone using for sodium bicarbonate? And people are like, sodium bicarbonate, you idiot. It's all the same. I thought that was great. So we
Arm
love
and
it.
hammer or leg and sickle.
Hammer or leg and sickle. And, if you want to support us by just being there, come to the public side. If you'd like to support us monetarily, because, it does take effort to do the show. There's lots of ways to do it. You could buy us a beer. What else could you do, Ben?
You can join the membership. We have 3-tiered membership, 5-tiered membership. We just added 2 more tiers. No, it could be as simple as $8 a month. The bronze thing, you get all sorts of benefits from that. Come into the Discord and see hidden parts of the Discord. No, I'm just kidding.
There are hidden parts of the Discord.
Yeah,
There's absolutely. You could get
it's just like Scientology. The more you pay, the deeper you go, the more we'll tell you.
What is your R level?
Yes. Your beef level.
And there's a bunch of merch and stuff. Anyway, it's really fun, and it's a fun community, and we appreciate it. And we're kind of just way excited that it's still a thing, and that Ben and I are still excited about doing the show. So we want to thank you all, and thank you for the support in whatever it is, even if it's just spreading the show around and posting links places. It's all really helpful. And I promise on the next episode, Ben's going to shave his chest.
Yes.
I got a beef wall behind me.
Backing up just slightly, what affects calcification? A lot of things affect calcification, suffice to say. There is no there is no single silver bullet. There are a ton of different things. Lighting's going to affect it. Chemistry in carbonate chemistry in various ways is going to affect it. Feeding is going to affect it, that sort of thing. So in general, at least within reason, for the kinds of chemistries that we're typically using in reef tanks, higher alkalinity is certainly going to increase your calcification. Inorganic carbon, it tends to be limiting to calcification for corals and other organisms.
So dirty water.
Dirty water?
Basically dirty water.
Yeah.
But also that makes me think of Sanjay's adding the ammonia.
That's a whole different. Okay,
We're gonna break Chris's brain.
Let me get into nutrients in a second.
Yeah.
Higher alkalinity is gonna generally promote higher calcification, higher pH within reason. I'm assuming all these things are within reason. Is going to promote higher calcification, although maybe not as much as we have often thought. And I'll just little spoiler, some of the recent work that I've done and folks in our group have done looking at effects of ocean acidification on corals and bazillions of other critters. We actually saw very small effects of acidification, a 0.2 pH unit reduction. So going from like a pH of 8.1 to 7.9 on, and yes, scale, we use the total hydrogen ion scale, but don't worry about it. It's like Celsius versus Fahrenheit. So in general, those things are going to promote higher calcification. Higher calcium probably will too, although it's likely going to have kind of diminishing returns because there's so much calcium in seawater as compared to the amount of alkalinity. So
it sounds like all of these things are kind of the same. pH has some effect, but there's no reason to boost your tank to 8.6 because it's not the only thing that's affecting. You don't need to bring your alkalinity to 12. You don't need to do all that because all these things work together and changing one doesn't matter. And furthermore, it's like being at a buffet doesn't mean you're really going to eat more because there's more food available. Means there's just more food sitting there. It's not really converting to muscle.
Yeah, no, fair enough.
Maybe.
Yeah, no, I think that's a reasonable analogy. In general, higher of those things is going to help, but yeah, if you were to say raise the pH of your tank to 8.6, really realistically, about the only way to do that is to use a very high pH additive, kalkwasser, maybe sodium carbonate.
People are doing it.
Yeah, and what you're going to get very quickly is a snowstorm that made everything a lot worse than it was if you had just run a pH of like 8.3.
Just because you're trying to redline it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But and what your new research, I don't want to put you on the spot of saying something that's not published, but the point two,
some of this is out, so it's good.
Going up 0.2 pH doesn't actually get you the kick that you might think it does.
It was not a huge effect. And here we're actually going down in pH, so looking at acidification, but same principle. It's not that there was no effect. The effect varied by species, but it wasn't very big. Even for the species that were most sensitive, it wasn't a huge effect. And for one of them, we actually saw higher calcification under lower pH, which was a bit surprising.
Is it possible to say a percentage of when you say not a very big effect? People understand percentages, so I try to go to that.
For most of them, less than 10%.
Less than 10, yeah. Okay, so who cares? Sorry, Ben,
Chris,
go ahead.
But Chris, also, I want to make this distinction too, because you're talking about like 0.2 pH. Well, then, what screams to me is that us hobbyists are using like sort of crappy methods to test pH at best, whereas you're probably using like YSI or some other like really expensive equipment.
So our $10,000 YSI,
Yep. Oh, boom, nailed it.
So our $10,000 YSI with $1,200 pH probe,
Woo!
I trust for a ballpark, not for accurate.
Yeah.
And that's much better equipment than
And we're using $100 things.
Exactly. So the way that we actually use this, and I do use the YSI quite regularly. It's great for ballpark. It's great when I'm making little adjustments to tweak the water chemistry in a tank. It's useful for that. It's about 10 times more accurate and precise than what you're gonna get in a a hobbyist grade electrode, but using a spectrophotometric method. It's basically, like color change pH indicators, but using a good spectrophotometer and
yeah.
That we can measure this very, very precisely. So just for ballpark, with a hobbyist grade pH electrode, if it's freshly calibrated, because all of them lose their calibration over time. I think oftentimes people, when they get wonky pH values, like their tank is reading 8.6 or 8.8 and they haven't added any kalkwas or anything, that's because the calibration of your pH probe is crap. It's just off. But anyway, hobbyist grade electrodes, you're probably going to be accurate to within plus or minus 0.1. So if it says it's 8.0, it might actually be 8.1. It might actually be 7.9.
But in Chris, that's why I think it's so insane that hobbyists try to redline numbers with equipment that aren't going to accurately reflect what's going on, when it's just like, quit trying to redline those numbers and just, look at the variability of your testing methods and just get in the ballpark and quit freaking out about trying to be as accurate as you cannot be.
Right. Yeah. No, if you're running and skipping around at the edge of a cliff all the time, eventually you're going to trip and fall.
Oh, yeah. That's fucking beautiful. That's fucking beautiful. Listen, this is so far been the most Reef Beef of a Reef Beef episode. This is literally hanging out with Chris and going, hey, what about this? What about this? What about this? What about this? So I want to get to your research, and we've gone all over the place wonderfully, I think. What on the calcification, the alkalinity, what have we missed anything that you think hobbyists should know that you remember?
Yeah, so I guess I'll stress a few things. Measure and adjust. That's the only thing that works. I would not, as we were just discussing, I would not try to push things to the very, very edge, because if you're at the very, very edge with everything, eventually you're going to fall over the edge. Yeah, and something real bad's going to happen. So good enough is usually good enough.
That's my saying. That's my saying.
Wonderful. Higher alkalinity within reason is going to be a good thing for calcification by your corals, coral and algae, other things. Moderate yes.
What do you consider?
Yes, in the back.
That's the same question. You ask it, Ben.
Yeah.
Ask it, Ben.
Yeah. What do you I generally stay in the 8s, but in my experience, when I get to 12, a lot of different corals will look a little pissed. So maybe you're saying like 9 to 11, 9 to 10.
So natural seawater at a salinity of 35, because if you change the salinity, you change how much of these salts are dissolved in it. But no, natural seawater alkalinities, it's like 6.2 or something. A little over 6. It's a little over 6. In practice, though, it can be as low as 5 in an area that gets a lot of freshwater runoff and the salinity is low. It could be as high as 7 in the Red Sea with super high salinity. So that's what's natural. And we have abundant evidence that higher than natural tends to be effective. So usually, if it were me, and I'm just going to speak for myself, what has worked really well for me, I mean, in my work, I'm just using natural seawater. But what has worked really effectively for me in tanks is at least 7, not higher than 12. Somewhere in that range has worked really well for me. And yeah, if you have an observation like, when I get to 12, some of the corals look pissed off, well, don't do that then.
Yeah. But I think some people might think like, oh my God, if I go from 8 to 10, I'm going to kill something, or, like a wandering pH. But I think there's more wiggle room with alkalinity there.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's a fair amount of wiggle room with all the stuff. If they could not, if any of these organisms could not tolerate, differences in these parameters, they really wouldn't be doing well in the ocean.
Yeah.
So, we can achieve very different chemistries in our tanks as compared to what exists in the ocean. And my take on it is, what's natural is a good starting point. It's a good default. If we don't have reasons, good reasons to deviate from what is natural, cool, just go with it because we know it works. But when we do have good reasons to deviate from what's natural, well, we have good reasons to do that then. We know that higher alkalinity is going to boost coral calcification, and oftentimes by a decent amount for like a large change. So going from like a DKH of 6 to 7, you're probably not going to notice much. But going from like 6 to 10 or even slightly higher, that is going to have, for most species, a pretty substantial effect. And there we're not talking like 10%. It might boost your calcification 50%, 70%.
Okay.
So, with those sorts of changes. Calcium, on the other hand, and also keep in mind, these are all, we should consider the proportional changes. So sometimes folks will say, oh, I'm slightly making this up, but not entirely, Bolus method. But let's say, 430 parts per million for calcium is considered good, whereas 440, now that's a problem. You don't want to exceed that. Bullshit. That's like a few percent difference. There is no threshold. No. But there's so much calcium in seawater, boosting it much higher than natural seawater levels is probably not going to help much. pH, I would shoot for within reason, 8 to 8.4. But even if it's a bit lower than that, say you're running a calcium reactor, you could certainly make up for a fairly large discrepancy in pH, like say 8.3 versus 7.8 or 9, something like that, but just boosting your alkalinity up a few DKH.
Okay, so I think we're getting into the part of where it's like, when somebody says I boosted my whatever and everything's doing better, I always think, but that's also got to do with everything else that's been chugging along till this point. Everything's maturing and settling in and adapting to the current conditions. So it's not necessarily, this is what makes all of this so difficult to pinpoint, is the systems are so dynamic. But the one thing I'm taking away from this is, I've been running between 8 and 9 DKH. And I recently bumped it up to like 9.3, 9.4. I might bump that up just a little bit more because you said some magic words about alkalinity, but I'm not going back to 12 ever again. That was just ridiculous. But putting up my threshold to 9.8 seems, from 8.8 to 9.8 instead of 8.1 to 9.1 seems like it may be worth it. But that's a small risk that I'm taking there. And it's also an easy thing, and it's not redlining anything. So I'm comfortable with it, and I don't expect magic. But it seems easy enough to do, so why not? But that's different than going, Chris said more alkaline is better, so I'm going to 13, right?
Yeah.
Um,
And
yeah.
and I'll say with that, so within there are multiple components within the carbonate system, and something we always certainly want to avoid is a bunch of abiotic precipitation of carbonates, causing a snowstorm or getting a bunch of precipitation in sand or on pumps or something like that. Just, bad things happen. And also it just becomes a huge pain to constantly be cleaning pumps and whatnot. So it's not, for all of these parameters, there is no threshold where magic happens. You increase the calcium, eventually you're going to reach a point where you're getting increased abiotic precipitation, but you would have to increase calcium so freaking much. Practically speaking, it's not going to happen. If you go from 400 to 800, which no one's going to run their tank at 800 parts per million calcium, you've doubled it. If you go from 6 DKH to 12 DKH, you have doubled the alkalinity. If you change the pH by 0.3 units, you are reducing the hydrogen ion concentration by half, or double, by half. So anyway, it's multiple interacting parameters. And like we were saying, if you're trying to push everything to the edge, it's eventually going to go bad.
Okay.
I mean, and you can say, since we love analogies, I've been thinking about this while y'all been talking, is calcification is like a vehicle, and there's a lot of things that make the vehicle run. Like you could pull out the fuel pump, you could do this, you could do that. There's things you could rip out, the vehicle would still go, just not very effectively and not as far. But there's a lot going on that makes your vehicle go down the road.
That's a great freaking analogy, Ben.
Absolutely. Gold star.
Gold star. You can move up one row.
I didn't even go to college.
We know. That's clear. Tell us about your research and what's going on in the world. And it seemed like you might be able to tell us a little bit of not doomy news, like our friend Kevin Erickson will tell us, because he's right there watching what's happening with the heating weeks. But so tell us about that, and then we'll let you get on with your day, even though this is freaking fun.
But glad to do it. So as I mentioned earlier, a project, the project has since wrapped up, but it was a long-term project looking at, and measuring everything we possibly could from these reef communities. So we had 40 quote unquote mesogosms. A mesogosm is just a small-ish representation of the real world. In everyday parlance, we might call it a flowed-through reef tank. So had a bunch of reef tanks, lots of corals, reef rubble, sand, all that sort of thing, and exposed them for a couple of years to normal present-day conditions of temperature and of pH. So just, what they're getting on average over the seasonal cycle, and then 2 degrees Celsius hotter than that. So that's about that's 3.6 Fahrenheit. So pretty hot. But what they can experience during marine heat waves and what they're expected to experience on average in about 50 years. Also cross that with 2 levels of pH, just normal pH for present day, and then acidified by 0.2 pH units by just injecting CO2 gas, causing ocean acidification. Cross those 4 things, let it cook for 2 years, and it was actually a little bit more than 2 years, to see what happens. And suffice to say, in this grand project, we're testing some of the projections that emerge from the scientific literature about how we expect coral reefs to respond to these sorts of conditions. And suffice to say, the expectations from coming from hundreds of studies in the literature, just synthesizing that, is pretty much everything's supposed to die. like pretty much all the corals. The systems are expected to become net decalcifying, so
Oof.
literally dissolving faster than they are calcifying. We also expect a major decline in biodiversity, not only loss of coral species richness, but what folks have been projecting is just devastation of biodiversity, major loss in biodiversity. So one important aspect is a lot of those projections. And again, this is just like what we're on track for in 50 years. These are not extreme wild conditions. That's what we expect without reductions in climate change. That's what we expect in 2075. Hopefully we have reductions, but anyway. So we expect just absolute devastation of these systems, right? We ran the experiment, and that is not at all what we got. So certainly there are declines, there's damage, but the expectation is you lose about 99.9% of your corals. Pretty much the corals all die. That's the expectation. We actually had a little over 1/3 of them that died. Almost 2/3 of them actually survived. Now, a lot of those that survived did bleach during the warmest season, when you're at up to 2.5 degrees Celsius, so up to like 4 degrees Fahrenheit higher than normal. So we lost corals, but we didn't lose nearly what has been projected. So that's good. Also, if we look at physically how much coral there is and doing it in 3D, not 2D.
Okay.
I spent a lot of time on ImageJ. There in all the tanks, we start off with about 3% of the internal dimensions, 3% at the beginning was live coral cover. And what that, just for perspective, these were just shy of like 20-gallon aquariums, or like they weren't aquariums, but like 18-gallon tanks. Start off with like 30 frags of 8 different coral species per tank, just for perspective. After 2 years, we went from 3% three-dimensional coral cover to 40% in the control and the acidification treatment. So big, more than order of magnitude increase in coral. In the heated treatments, we only got about half that much increase. So things are worse. Things are worse for the corals, but we still had a lot of coral growing in the tanks. That's good news. When we look at calcification and using change in alkalinity along with seawater inflow and a few other parameters to estimate everything. So I mentioned that like a really awesome reef is going to be chugging around maybe 10 kilograms per meter square per year. A lot of reefs are naturally going to be lower than that, and a lot of reef tanks are going to be lower than that. I'll just say, side note, when we calculated for Sanjay, it was 8.9. So his tank is great. For our little mesocosms in the control, I was getting about 8.5. So again, real healthy number. They were doing quite well. The overall community shows less calcification under acidification, less calcification under warming, and the least under the combination of both. But none of them were dissolving. None of them were net dissolving. They were still calcifying at about half of what present day communities are. So again, in terms of how much coral we have, yeah, these are serious stressors. Things get worse, but the system isn't just totally devastated. If we look at calcification, things get worse, but the system isn't totally devastated.
But there's huge loss of biodiversity.
Next point.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No. That's
Ben is just on it today.
That is perfect segue. So looking at biodiversity, we had and again, this is a team of different folks. You know, I was there every day for like 3 years, but I can only do so much in a week. I can work, you know, I can work 60 hours, 80 hours a week. I can't work 200 hours a week. So we had a fantastic team of collaborators to be able to address what was going on with the responses of all sorts of other organisms. And this included coralline algae, fleshy algae, microalgae, that sort of thing, sponges, what else? Coral associated microbes, water column associated microbes. Also, we used technique, a technique that's referred to as metabarcoding. Maybe Rich is familiar, but basically DNA techniques to identify the hundreds and hundreds of species of snails and crustaceans and brittle stars and things like that that are challenging to identify more generally, especially when you have tens of thousands of individuals. So combining all those approaches and also looking at the richness of the corals, species richness of the corals. So what we ended up seeing, thinking again about biodiversity, we saw reduced species richness of the corals. So we had 8 species in the system. In the heated mesocosms, we tended to lose at least 1, if not 2 of those species. So on average, we were losing about 1.5 species due to heating. Acidification had no effect. So bad for the corals. What folks have often assumed is that the other biodiversity on the reef is going to respond in the same way as the corals. So that's what folks have often assumed. But that assumption has been untested. Wink, wink. So in terms of biodiversity, corals respond negatively to heating, but they don't care about acidification. If we look at the sponges don't care about heating in terms of biodiversity, but they do care quite a bit about acidification. Under acidified conditions, we were seeing complete losses of some groups of sponges. The algae of various sorts that we looked at don't care, with the exception of the algal symbionts in the corals. We actually saw higher. No, did we? God, I gotta remember now. I want to say we saw higher richness under heating. No, those guys were no effect. Never mind, disregard that. Coral-associated microbes, so like their microbiome, responded positively to heating, did not respond to acidification. Other kinds of algae responded negatively. When we looked at the metabarcoding results, so this is identifying all the little snails and crustaceans, echinoderms, worms, all the little critters. Acidification was bad for biodiversity. Warming was good for biodiversity. And the two things in combination cancel out.
Wow.
So if we look at
complicated.
It is very complicated. Notice that absolutely none of these groups show the same response as the corals. So by assuming that these other critters are going to respond to these challenges in the same way that corals are is just clearly empirically wrong.
Yeah.
It's complicated.
And it makes sense. With extinctions that have happened in the Earth in the past, something else jumps in to take over whatever's dominant. So we would figure that to happen. But
right.
But coral reefs, the way we know them, seem like they're going to change.
Right.
There is something that might mess up your arithmetic these next 4 years.
Oh, geez.
No, my honest take on it is it's only 4 years.
It's only 4 years.
How much damage can we do?
Yeah, exactly. So that's part of that. And as you said, Rich, things are going to change. And while we're seeing these different responses among different types of organisms, corals versus sponges versus different kinds of algae, et cetera, in terms of the biodiversity. If we look at the overall effect of the whole community on biodiversity, we actually see that there's no effect. Some are going up, others are going down, but if you look at the overall biodiversity, they balance out. What is critical, though, is how many species doesn't tell you which species. These communities are different. Under all 4 treatments, the mixture of species, the mixture of organisms that you have living there is different in all cases. So reefs of the future are definitely going to change. They're going to be different. Reefs of the future are not going to be the same as today, but if we actually address climate change in a meaningful way, not everything is doomed. Not everything is doomed.
Yeah. Well, at least it's really easy to address climate change in a meaningful way.
Yep. Luckily, we've nailed that. So I don't see anything else to worry about. But no, just I mean, realistically, I don't assume we're gonna necessarily hit all of our targets, but as long as we don't go way past internationally agreed upon targets, and there's every reason to think that that is realistic, like keeping it down to a tolerable level, reefs are going to be damaged. We're going to have more bleaching. We're going to have more mortality. Reefs are going to be different, but they're still going to be reefs if we do those things.
You know, in like La La Land, like I know this would never, you don't, when you're doing serious work like you're doing, no one figures about like, you know, what could be different, what could change. But I'm saying like in my magical land, we all figure out cold fusion in the next month. Like stuff like that, I suppose maybe could start to turn it all on its head. No one should be, well, I'm not saying no one should be hoping for that, but no one should necessarily be expecting that. But it's like we're doing all this damage to the planet. It's like, don't worry, we'll figure it out. You know what I mean?
Well, we are clever creatures. We often clever ourselves out of problems. I mean, Norman Borlaug clevered us out of, 2 billion dead people on the subcontinent, with dwarf wheat. Of course, that made a whole bunch of other problems. But it is possible we could come up with better energy and better food and better, what's the important one? There's one really important one. Carbon sequestering might, all we need is one good way to do that. It could make a difference.
What I would argue is we already have hundreds of pretty good ways to do those things. And by combining them, we know how to do this. We're already moving in a reasonable direction. It would certainly help if we got there faster to minimize the amount of damage that we're gonna have as a result. But I mean, we've already put measures in place, so we're not going to end up with what we considered the most realistic but worst case scenario even just a few years ago.
Yeah,
we've put enough measures in place that we're probably not going to hit the best case scenario. We're going to be somewhere in between, but a lot better than the worst case is still improvement.
Okay, so kind of a boiling frog, but without the water getting to boiling.
Right. Yeah.
Situation.
Yeah. And also, I'll just say, folks always, I shouldn't say always, often misunderstand that analogy. They don't realize that the frog has been pithed. It has no brain. So what that is, yeah.
That's pretty accurate to what's going on with people.
So what that actually tests is reflex without brain, without a functional brain. But anyway, that's
okay. I love that. I didn't know that. That's great. Chris, I want to thank you so much, and thank you, like Ben said earlier, thanks for the work you've been doing. Been great to talk to you again. Yeah, and if you ever if you enjoyed this at all and feel like coming on again and have something you feel like talking about, just let us know, because it was informative and interesting and useful. So thank you so much.
Yeah. No, thank you for having me. I will dedicate a section in my freezer to all my reef beefs. But yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
Great,
Great to
Chris.
meet you,
Thank
man.
you.
Good
Thank
to
you.
meet you. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much, man. This episode was hosted by Rich and Ben, produced by Rich and Snowman, assistant produced by Snowflake, and directed and edited by Snowman. We'd like to thank our Prime and Gold level beefers, Farhad, Joe's Coral Reef, Francois C., Bay Area Reefers, Ben J., Robert S., Adam S., John W., Jim W., Scott C., James B., Brittany Hannah, and Jason C.
So Reef Beef is a time and a place that is special. What happens here is we are all a bunch of reef nerds, and this show is basically sort of what we do when we go to a trade show and we're sitting around at the bar talking about stuff. And so naturally, we don't limit our vocabulary, and sometimes that vocabulary contains adult language, okay? And just, if that bothers you, come on, man. So anyways, this is Reef Beef, and strap on your seatbelts. Wait, I want to show you something real quick.
I don't want to see it. Oh, dude. Dude. That's fucking awesome. We'll do that next time. That is so awesome. I can't even tell you how awesome.
No
it is.
nipples.
I know you had them removed for the show.
Yeah, for Reef Beef. I had my nipples removed.
That's incredible. Incredibly generous of you.
Yeah, I'm a generous and a kind.
Get out.
Go away. Damn, boy.
I'm sorry, my stool is moving. That's a
Ew.
terrible statement.
Yeah.
I made it
Grandpa
great today.
facial hair.
I made it great.
Oh.
I got a beef wall behind me.
Chris,
I'm the
tell her.
smartest idiot in the village. Wait, I'm excited you went to a juggling convention.
Yeah. So there's all kinds of juggling conventions all the time. And this one was in Palo Alto, which is about 45 minutes from here. I went to it last year. My friend, ex-partner Scotty made me go. I was really anxious and didn't have a great time. And this year I went, I'm going to drive down myself just on Saturday and, leave. And I didn't juggle at all. I just hung out with jugglers and sat in and helped with some comedy classes. And then some good friend jugglers and we all were met up and we all went out to dinner. And I was going to come home and I went out to dinner and had a great time hanging out with people that I love. Now, the juggling conventions are fucking insane. I would have thought these have gotten, smaller over the years, but this one is
I want to feel
crazy.
like these are like a Shakes the Clown episode.
It's kind of like that. But now there's like, there was a unicycling going on outside. There were people playing.
Do they get mad
juggling.
at mimes?
No mimes are allowed. There was people playing juggling volleyball, which is you juggle. Everyone has two clubs, and there's one club that keeps going back and forth.
Oh my God.
You have to juggle and throw it. There's all kinds of competitions, and then you go into the gym, and there's workshops going on in there, how to do a certain trick, or and then there's 200 people juggling all kinds of different juggling. And then there's comedy writing workshops going on. There's creativity workshops. There's how to be better on social media if you're a variety artist.
Damn.
And on Saturday night, there's a variety show of people who are there and they do it.
Please tell me at the banquet that like jugglers don't have a damn juggler go up, right?
No, at the banquet, we have a reef keeper come up.
Yeah. It's so different.
There's no banquet at these. It's not there's the International Juggling Convention, the IJA. They have a banquet and a ceremony. This one's just a great local one that's at a high school, and a guy named Matt just makes it happen every year. And it's
there's no pressing issues like global juggle warming and
no, not at this one.
Bowling ball acidification.
It's really interesting, though, to see how the juggling world has changed over the million years I've been a juggler. It's, there don't seem to be many comedy jugglers anymore. It's not.
It just ain't funny no more.
It is just no one's kind of doing it. It's all kind of shifted to kind of Cirque du Soleil spectacle kind of stuff. So that's weird and interesting. There's
like it's just gotten like crazier, like they're following each other to getting crazier and crazier.
They're so good. Technically, it's unbelievable how good people are.
Is it a thing like you can be taught it and can be good, but like seriously, I guess there it would be like great hand-eye coordination. There could be like the Michael Jordan of juggling.
There absolutely is that. But it's the same thing as everything. You know, talent is only practice that no one noticed, right?
Yeah.
So, when I used to think I learned how to juggle 5 balls, which was a big deal when I was in it. 5 balls was like the thing. And I was like, I learned that real quick. And then when I think about it, it was 2 years for me to be able to do 5 balls of practice. So, yeah, there is definitely, generally they're the numbers jugglers, right? So it's, people are doing 7 clubs with back cross pirouettes. It's fucking insane what they can do nowadays because they've been learning since they were a kid. And also they know that this is possible. So
and these are multi-generational jugglers.
Yeah. Well, the best jugglers now are, in their teens and 20s. It's in 30s. It's crazy how good they've gotten. It's just nuts.
And then you get arthritis and
yeah, and then there were so many old school jugglers there that it was great. There was, Barry Friedman of the Raspinis, Dan Holzman of the Raspinis, Scotty Meltzer and me from, Comedy Industries and Monkey Wrench, John Wee from the Passing Zone, Ben Decker was there. Just the list of people who, were like in the know of juggling that were at all the conventions. There was a lot of them there. It was really, really cool. There's more than I'm not remembering the names of, or remembering who was there. Oh, Bill and Hart were there. It was nuts, the amount of juggling power that was performing juggling power from my kind of realm that was at this one convention.
If you're a juggler, you ought to be there.
Well, that's the IJA. This one, though, this was a great convention. Like, I'm going to go all 3 days next year, I think. And I didn't juggle once, which I thought was really fun. I was just hanging out, having a good time, talking about comedy writing and talking about juggling with people.
I'm trying to equate it to like the reef industry, and I'm thinking like there's not like booths and shit like that, right?
There's some booths. You can buy equipment there. Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
And people like arguing about what's the best bowling pin and
yeah. Although now it's interesting. So there's a guy there who 3D printed his clubs and they kind of twisted together.
Oh.
And that was really cool. So you get to see the new stuff. This guy Mark out there, in 10 years, he's not going to be able to walk, but he can do all this crazy stuff on a tall unicycle while balancing and juggling. And it's just really cool. So that was this juggling convention.
That's cool.
And it was
that
right
has
here.
A lot to do with reef tanks.
It did.